Hi everyone, this is Kyle, and I'm going to go back to Star Wars here. Now we know Disney's going to be making some Star Wars movies in the coming years. There's going to be a movie with Rey coming back, and apparently Kathleen Kennedy might be trying to rush that film into production. There's word that the people at Disney fear it's going to be flopping worse than the Marvels. Adam Driver, who played Kylo Ren or Ben Solo in the Disney trilogy, he gave an interview recently where he talked about what Disney's original plans for the character were, and how that changed while they were filming. Now there's this one article that came up from Bounding into Comics. It's more of an opinion piece that I'm going to go over here. I mean, this video might be a little bit more of an autopsy of the Disney Star Wars trilogy. I mean, I've talked about some of my problems before, but I'll do it again here. So the article on Bounding into Comics titled Opinion, Disney Star Wars Sequels Were Doomed from the Start. And the article talks mostly about how there really wasn't a plan to begin with for this trilogy, which, yeah, that's one of the biggest problems with it. I mean, this trilogy came right after the Star Wars prequels, around 10 years or so after the Star Wars prequels came out. 10, 15 years, I forget the exact amount of time. And yes, there was a lot of valid criticism of the Star Wars prequels. There was a lot of CGI in there, which a lot of people didn't like, not as many practical effects. There were a lot of contradictions to the original trilogy, things like that. There were a lot of plot holes. Now Disney, they fixed up a lot of the CGI. They put a lot of practical effects in, things like that, real sets, that sort of stuff. So visually, I think the Disney Star Wars trilogy, it looked better, but story-wise, it was worse than the prequels. Because at least the prequels, they had a bit of a structure to them. They at least had a plan to them. Disney, there was no plan to it at all. And you could clearly see, like, from movie to movie that the plan was changing as they went along. Where essentially each director, they had their own vision for what the story was going to be. And if you're Kathleen Kennedy, why would you not have a plan going in? I mean, that's just common sense right there. So I'll start off. Kylo Ren actor Adam Driver has confirmed what many fans could see with their eyes as they sat through the confused mess known as Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Disney had no master plan for Star Wars. Despite spending $4 billion to acquire the galaxy far, far away from George Lucas, along with the whole of Lucasfilm, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker felt disjointed and duct taped together, because that's exactly what happened. Yeah, I mean, The Force Awakens, when it first came out, I didn't think it was terrible. I thought it was fine. There were some problems I had with it, like Rey beating Kylo Ren first fight. She hadn't even been trained. But I reserved judgment for the time being, thinking, well, maybe there's a plan. There's still 2 movies left. But then we get to Episode 8. Basically everything that was set up by The Force Awakens was ruined in The Last Jedi. And we got to The Last Jedi. I mean, say what you want about the way they treated Luke. Yeah, they treated him badly. They had him die at the end of Episode 8. I don't have a problem with the idea of Luke dying if he trained a successor and he passed his knowledge on and all that kind of stuff. And if they had him die in a more heroic manner or something like that. Yeah, I wouldn't have had a problem with it, but the way they handled Luke Skywalker was unacceptable. Probably the single biggest problem I had, and this was kind of what ruined the whole trilogy for me, was in Episode 7, you set up this real mysterious new leader, Snoke his name was. Apparently he was around for the entire original trilogy, and you're wondering who on earth is he, where was he during the events of the original trilogy, things like that. There was a lot of mystery around him. He was real interesting. And then in Star Wars Episode 8, they make him look like a giant here, but it turns out this is just an enormous hologram. But there's also a mystery of where is he. And then you get to Episode 8, what do? Rian Johnson decided to subvert our expectations, because apparently subverting our expectations is the mark of a great story. If there was anything that ruined the trilogy for me, it was this right here. Because this was supposed to be your villain for the entire trilogy, and they just decided to get rid of him. Because apparently we gotta do whatever is the most unexpected thing to do. And they're mentioning Kylo Ren here. I'll make this comment. He had a real good costume, if you ask me. I mean, it's kind of a mixture of like Darth Vader. You got the helmet, but you also have, the dark hood and that sort of thing. I mean, this is a good costume for a Star Wars villain, if you ask me. Some of you compare him to, what was it, Darth Revan or somebody from the Star Wars Expanded Universe or comics or things like that. Me, I don't really follow that stuff too much. I pay more attention to the Star Wars movies, but this was a real good costume. But then they had him take the helmet off several times, and I think once they did that, he wasn't as good of a character at that point. And I'll say this, one little thing they did that really annoyed me, every time he had this mask on, they had to acknowledge in the movie that he was wearing a mask. Every time. I don't know why they had to do that, but apparently they did, and that was one little thing that just bugged the hell out of me in the movies. And they went in the story of how Ben Solo became evil, and what did they come up with? Luke tried to kill him at one point, and so then he turned evil. And it's like, I think you guys can do a little better than that. But anyway, I'll continue. Movies change throughout their production. Yeah, they do. I have a couple books I've written, and yeah, there's always going to be some level of making up as you go along when you're writing. But you gotta have at least the main stuff figured out ahead of time. I mean, if you don't have the main plot and the main events of your story outlined ahead of time, you're not ready to start writing, you're not ready to start filming. This is well known and part of the process of filmmaking, but there is something sadly comical and, in the case, egregious in Star Wars being handled this way by the world's largest entertainment company. The same company, mind you, that oversaw the intricately plotted Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU, spanning 30 plus films and TV series since 2007. Disney was running the show by 2012 when the Avengers debuted, and while the MCU has since become a bit tiresome and flooded the market with too much content for consumers to keep up with, it's been a meticulously planned campaign. Yeah, I mean, they were shoving out one movie after another, but there was at least a connection with everything. They were all building up to Thanos. And nowadays, Marvel, it's not what it used to be. I mean, they're just shoving stuff out at this point, none of which is really that good. Why did Star Wars, the most iconic story in modern history, get treated by Disney like a last-minute hack job from start to finish? Yeah, I mean, Kathleen Kennedy, that's inexcusable, and the end result of it is Star Wars, it's not what it used to be. Star Wars used to be an event whenever a new movie was coming out, and now it's just another IP on a streaming service, and that's all. And frankly, there's no excuse for that. On the Rich Eisen show via Variety, Driver discussed Kylo Ren's character arc in Star Wars, which ended in Kylo renouncing the dark side and returning to his natural identity, that of Ben Solo. I had an overall arc in mind that J.J. Abrams wanted to do, Driver said. His idea was that Kylo's journey was the opposite journey of Vader, where Vader starts the most confident and the most committed to the dark side. And then by the last movie, he's the most vulnerable and weak. He wanted to start with the opposite. The actor elaborated, this character was most confused and vulnerable, and by the end of the 3 movies, he would be the most committed to the dark side. I tried to keep that arc in mind, regardless if that wound up not being the journey anyway, because it changed while shooting. But I was still focused on that. Again, plans change. Consider the known fact that Darth Vader was not originally supposed to be Luke Skywalker's father. Star Wars 1977 was made as a standalone film with plenty of material for more of the story to be told. In the event, Star Wars was a success. Yeah, again, there's always going to be some changes whenever you're making a film or writing a book or whatever, but you've got to have at least the main stuff figured out. I mean, I have a couple books written, couple books published, and yeah, when you're writing a book, there's always a little bit of making up as you go along, but when I say making up as you go along, I mean some little things that happen chapter by chapter, lines of dialogue here or there. The big events in each book, you have to have that stuff planned out ahead of time. If you don't, your story's going to be a mess. If George Lucas hadn't deviated from the intent of the original film, Obi-Wan Kenobi would have been telling the truth when he said that Vader was merely a failed student who murdered Anakin Skywalker. In early depictions of The Empire Strikes Back, Luke never lost a hand in combat, and Han Solo didn't end up encased in carbonite. Luke and Leia were not meant to be siblings in Star Wars up until the development of Return of the Jedi, thus the incestuous love triangle dynamic between Skywalker Twins and Han Solo, which remains a punchline amongst fans to this day. Yeah, in this light, it could be taken as a norm for Star Wars storytelling that key plot points will change during shooting, and Kylo Ren's character arc is just the latest change-up in a long history of slapdash Star Wars filmmaking. But there's something else going on here, something far more stupid. Consider as well the plot evolution of Daisy Ridley and John Boyega's characters, Rey and Finn respectively. Both have sounded off on how their characters were being reworked during production at the expense of key plot developments and previous installments in the sequel trilogy. Yeah, I mean, Rey, played by Daisy Ridley, I mean, it's well documented the problems we have with her. I mean, she was basically perfect from the get-go. She was strong from the get-go. She never had any training in the Force. She beats Kylo Ren first time she faces him, and then she's going to be trained by Luke, and I'm thinking, does she really need training? Because it didn't look like she needed it in The Force Awakens. John Boyega, they give him a character arc where he's running from the Empire or the First Order or whatever. I'm just going to call it the Empire. And then he goes from that to turning around and fighting. And then in Episode 8, they just have him do the same character arc all over again. It was pointless. Rey was going to be a Kenobi offspring, then she was definitively made Rey nobody in Rian Johnson's Episode 8, and by the end she was Rey Palpatine, daughter of a Palpatine test tube baby. Yeah, this is a terrible idea if you ask me. And Snoke, when they decided to just kill him off, you get to Episode 9, they had to do some patchwork for that, so what did they do? They just made him a clone. Snoke was a clone all this time that Palpatine created. They just brought the Emperor back out of nowhere, and then they said, okay, Snoke is a clone. I mean, you're never going to convince me that it was their plan to bring Palpatine back the entire time. And I don't think any other Star Wars fans out there believe Disney when they say that it was their plan to bring Palpatine back. Boyega's comments about the mishandling of Finn's non-arc in Episodes 8 and 9 are well documented and mostly framed in terms of accusing Disney of racism. And you know, the funny thing here is, anybody who's criticized these Star Wars movies, they've been called racist. They've been called misogynist or whatever buzzword you want to use. But just look at this right here. Original Disney Star Wars poster for The Force Awakens. And then next to it you have the China poster. Do you see a difference here where Finn is? See how big he is here? And then suddenly they reduced it for the Chinese poster. And the people at Lucasfilm were calling Star Wars fans racist. Yeah, spare me of that. He's argued that they had plans for Driver and Ridley, but none for himself and Kelly Marie Tran. This is demonstrably false, based not only on Ridley's comments about her character development, but also on Driver's. There was no plan for anyone. Romance kindled in The Last Jedi between Boyega's Finn and Marie Tran's Rose Tico. Rose Tico was not a Star Wars character. She was just lecturing people about how there's oppression and we gotta fight the oppression, that sort of stuff. Star Wars is not a social commentary about fighting oppression. It is a fun space adventure. The characters are fun, the tone is fun. Yeah, Rose Tico was not a Star Wars character, and that's not Kelly Marie Tran's fault, that's the writer's fault. But yeah, Rose Tico was not a good character in Star Wars. General Hux, played by Domhnall Gleeson, went from destroying 5 whole planets in the Whatever system during The Force Awakens, the act of a crazed true believer, to being a shallow turncoat spy in the conclusion of the trilogy. He was then murdered and replaced by a random new character, General Pride. Yeah, I guess he was some new general in Episode 9. I did not go see Episode 9. I was done giving Disney my money at that point. I did think about seeing Episode 9 just out of curiosity of what on earth could they possibly do after ruining things in Episode 8. But at the end of the day, the people at Disney, the people at Lucasfilm, they were constantly attacking Star Wars fans, calling them straw man, istophobe words, whatever it might be. And I just said, you know what? No, I'm not giving them my money anymore. George Lucas loved to tweak and play with the rules and characters of the Star Wars universe. It's his universe after all. This aggravated certain Star Wars fans, but what Lucas had going for him was that he didn't seem to care at all ever. Whenever fans were mad about something in interview after interview, he would just shrug. Disney, however, seemed to be making a trilogy of Star Wars films based on Twitter feedback and focus group responses. That's no way to tell a story, and it shows. Yeah, you can't do it that way. The story has to be your story. It has to be your vision. I mean, it's never a bad idea to be open to feedback, but I would say to a certain extent. You still got to make sure that your story remains at its core what you intended it to be. And so you got to be a bit careful about what feedback you take and what feedback you don't. Kylo Ren could become a redemptive arc or double down on being evil. Finn could end up being Force sensitive or just be an average Joe. Rey could come from any elite Star Wars family they wanted or have no family at all. George Lucas had something he wanted to say in Star Wars episodes 1 through 6. The problem with Disney's Star Wars trilogy isn't the last minute changes to character arcs, it's that they never had anything to say in the first place. Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem, there was no plan at all from the beginning, which I don't know why you wouldn't have a plan. And I mean, if you were to ask me, like, how could you have fixed the Disney Star Wars trilogy? I mean, honestly, because there was no structure, no plan, there's really no way to fix it without just tearing it down and starting over. If I were to make a few suggestions, I would say these things. The first thing is obvious. Luke Skywalker needs to be treated with a lot more respect. They should not have brought the Emperor back. This guy Snoke should have been the villain the entire time. There should have been a lot of mystery around him as to, who is he and where was he during the original trilogy, that sort of thing. There should have been a lot more build-up to when you first see him in person on screen for the first time. Maybe there should have been a build-up as to, where is he and, a plot of trying to find him, maybe something like that. He should have been alive for the entire trilogy up until the end. Obviously, Rey can't just be perfect from the get-go. I mean, if there's one scenario where it might work that Rey is strong and Kylo Ren's not quite that intimidating, it would be if the two of them did a role reversal where, say, in Episode 8, Rey ended up turning to the dark side and Kylo Ren ended up coming back. That would have been the one scenario where that would have worked, I think, if you were to have Rey just be pretty strong with the Force right away. But even then, I'm not sure if that's a good idea to just have a character be great from the get-go. And if you were to do a role reversal, I mean, that would be something that would fit in with the type of story Star Wars is, where, you're tempted by the dark side and there's also redemption when you come back. Now, did Kathleen Kennedy ever consider having Rey turn evil? I have a feeling she didn't. Another pretty big change I would have would be the tone of it. All this stuff about how people are being oppressed and we need to fight the oppression, that kind of stuff. People giving speeches about how we're going to be fighting for the downtrodden and stuff like that. Cut all of that out. Star Wars is a fun space adventure. The tone of Star Wars is fun. The characters are fun. It is not a social commentary. I mean, that would be the probably first change I would make before anything else. Now, let me think what else. They tried to make Star Wars gritty. Star Wars really isn't a gritty type of story. I would say get rid of all the bombs and grenades and stuff like that and bring lasers back. You see a lot more bombs and that kind of stuff, which, Star Wars is, they use lasers in Star Wars. You know, that's one of the things that makes Star Wars special. Oh, and another thing I would do, I would put the space battles back in space. I don't know what it is with the people at Disney, but they loved having space battles take place on planets rather than out in space. I don't know why. I mean, you honestly didn't see outer space that much, period, in the Disney trilogy. And there's a bunch of other little ideas I could give you, but I'd probably be talking for a while. I'll end it here. I mean, if you have any good ideas as to what they could have done in the Disney trilogy, share them with me. Although, granted, I mean, it's kind of too late now. They already ruined Star Wars. I don't see any repairing Star Wars. Star Wars is dead at this point, if you ask me. I don't care about anything that they make anymore. And a lot of other Star Wars fans I know feel the same way. And when you're talking about the biggest franchise out there, I mean, there's no excuse for that. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, if you consider hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you all very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Take care until then.